Hello everybody! Today we are going to be talking about the intersection of two of my favorite things, knitting and books. Today's knitting book review is a Japanese knitting stitch Bible by Hitomi Shida. If my Japanese pronunciation is correct, translated with an introduction by Gail Rome. A while back, one of my students asked me if I'd ever done any Japanese knitting, and I had to say no. So when I saw this book at the Watertown Free Public Library, I decided to pick it up and have it be my next knitting book review. It's a very beautiful book. Japanese knitting is beautiful. Exquisite is actually the word that's in the title, and I would say that is very, very accurate. I am also not very well versed in stitch Bibles, so this is a fun introduction. I'm curious to check out some more and see how similar or different they are to what is in this book. I know one thing that is probably different is that Japanese knitting is represented entirely in charts, and they use symbols that have been standardized across all publishers, which is really cool. But it does mean there's not much text or descriptions. In this book there is, in the introduction, there's a guide to the symbols. So let's dive in. What is in this book? In the introduction to this book, we get to learn a little bit more about Shida. For example, she got into knitting while she was recovering from a medical illness, an illness that she had. And she actually first started with machine knitting, which I found to be very interesting. I find it a little bit hard to wrap my mind around machine knitting Japanese stitches. So maybe I'll have to see if there's some YouTube videos about that. But only after she became qualified as a machine knitting instructor did she start hand knitting, which is what this book is designed for. And I'm grateful because I am a hand knitter, not a machine knitter. What does this book cover? Charts. Since all Japanese knitting patterns, the designs themselves, are represented in charts, there's some information about how to read charts and how to read Japanese charts, or specifically the ones in this book, which is very helpful. So they go over some tips and tricks I am going to share with you. Tip and trick number 1. The single most important thing to remember is this. The chart shows the right side of the work. It's visual representation of what your knitting will look like when it's done. Each symbol describes what the stitch will look like on the right side, not necessarily what you will execute. This is a great thing to know about any charted project, the way to read the chart. Tip and trick number 2. Unlike other stitch pattern charts you may have seen, Japanese charts do not provide a key for how to work the symbols. The symbols are standardized, and every Japanese publisher uses the same symbol set. Seriously, how cool is that? Using the same standardized symbols makes it so much easier for people. Not that you can't have a legend, but you don't necessarily need it. It's very clear what each thing means. And that definitely helps keep things more accessible to all knitters. After the introduction, there is an extensive guide to the symbols for all of us non-Japanese knitters who need to learn and figure out what these symbols mean. It is 10.5 pages, a table that shows you the symbol and then describes in knitting terminology what that symbol represents. In addition to describing the symbol, they also have a section of the table that tells you what patterns in the book use that symbol. So if you enjoyed doing a particular element of a pattern, you could find other patterns that use that same combination of knits and purls and slips or yarn overs, etc. Tip and trick number 3. In most cases, the guide to symbols explains one way to accomplish a stitch. Experienced knitters may find that they know another way to achieve the same result. And if you do, feel free to do it your own way. Next comes the 260 patterns. This is an interesting term here because what they're talking about is how to create that design, not necessarily how to put that design into something that you would wear. So typically when I think of a pattern, I think that they are going to tell me what to do, including shaping or how many repeats to do, etc. That's not the type of pattern they're talking about. They're just talking about how many stitches over how many rows do you need to get this design. And this section has great tabs along the end. I found myself transported back to my childhood. My mom would take me into fabric stores a lot while she was looking at things, and I remember thumbing through pattern books, printed books, and they always had like sections down each side where it was like costumes and things for kids and stuff for your house or this age group and that age group, and then how many ever pages for that tab. And this book has the same thing, which I found to be useful too, of visually showing you how far to the next section or helping you find the different things. The different sections she goes over includes Lacy Patterns, and then there's a bunch of subsections, Lacy Patterns with bobbles, regular, with leaves, with scallops, and with smocking. Bead embroidery, overall patterns and crossing stitches, panel patterns, and then pattern arrangements. This one messed with my mind a little bit, actually. It's like adding different sections in between. So you'd have a repeat vertically and then add something else to the side. Or if it took up this much space, reducing it or elongating it. Visually, it looks cool. I'm still having trouble wrapping my brain around it. And she also has round yokes and edgings. So things that you could add to the top or bottom of the project you're working on. And she has them based on a 1x1 rib, a 2x2 rib, and a garter stitch edge. And if the front cover of this book wasn't enough to entice me, look at that beautiful stitch work. If that wasn't enough to entice me, the pictures of each of the patterns inside the book definitely convinced me the Japanese knitting is worth trying to do. Even if it's challenging, I think the end result is going to be worth having put in the effort for. And that brings me to quote number 1. Japanese designs are innovative and elegant, filled with fine stitchwork and beautiful detail, a feast for any knitter. Which I think is also an important word there, feast. If you're still learning how to do knits and purls, maybe enjoy that for now before you dive into this feast. Get a little bit more experience and then hop in here. Most of the sections have an actual completed item that they show, fingerless mittens or a scarf, for example, and each of the things that they show as a completed item does have a full pattern telling you how to make that item in the next section of the book. So if you liked those, you could do that specific item following the pattern to get that end design. One of the things that is used in quite a few of the patterns throughout this book are bobbles. I like bobbles, but I have found them to be a little bit tough to make them uniform and look the way that I want them to. And in this book, I was given a tip or a trick that is used by our author, Shida, that I definitely want to check out. In here, she uses a thick dot to show that it's a bobble, and then she has some information about what type of bobble. So tip number 4. Shaida's bobbles are mostly done with a crochet hook. Crocheted bobbles tend to be smoother and rounder than knitted bobbles, so you may want to give them a try. I love this tip and this idea, and I definitely want to give that a try. The last resource in this book is a photo tutorial or a picture tutorial. Some of them are actual photographs and some of them are computer generated images, but for some of the more complex stitch combinations that are included in here, they have that additional resource to help you learn how to do or see if you're doing that correctly. Have you ever tried Japanese knitting, or do you want to now? Share in the comments below your experiences or what you are looking forward to or nervous about in relation to Japanese knitting. Here are some of Shaida's own words to sum up what trying new stitches can feel like. In considering a knitting pattern, I carefully scrutinize one pattern stitch at a time. I divide it into its parts and try to reconstruct it. While I'm knitting, I'll quickly change the original pattern to see where it takes me. I can't stop trying new techniques. There are times when it goes smoothly, but more often I end up heaving a sigh of disappointment. I feel like that was a very useful thing to include, where if I find myself heaving disappointed sighs while doing some Japanese knitting, I can know that even the designer and author of this book, who created all these patterns, is often doing the same thing. Trying new things can be challenging, but also fun and definitely worth it. Who would I recommend this book to? An intermediate or advanced knitter who really enjoys doing complex projects. Thanks for watching. If you have any recommendations or requests for future book reviews, let me know in the comments below. Always happy to help do things that are useful to viewers. And give me a like, subscribe if you want to. It's a good, easy way to support my work and make sure you don't miss any future videos. And as always, happy knitting! All I want